What's happening? Adam Drake here, and in today's video I'm going to go over the process of taking a new engine. So this is the new OS Speed AD3 engine, and what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through the process of how I build up the engine after. So this has been done, run through our EBIS break-in system, and I'm going to go through and basically build up the engine, clutch, air filter, and have it ready to be installed into the car or truck. But there's a few tips when installing the clutch and also the air filter. Some of those tips you've seen in other videos, but just wanted to kind of do a start to finish build up from engine to completed engine ready to drop into your car. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you basically just kind of start to finish how I build up the clutch and air filter setup. I have here the new OS Speed AD3 engine. I'm gonna be installing the Protek 4-shoe clutch. I use, kind of depending on the track conditions, either the Protek 4-shoe clutch, the new Mugen 4-shoe clutch, or the OS 4-shoe clutch. They all kind of have their different characteristics. They all work really good. They're easy to adjust and easy to tune. Just kind of depends on the delivery of the power that you prefer. So to start, I'm going to go ahead, just kind of cut everything open, lay everything out on the table. So we're going to start with the clutch bell. So I use these Scotch-Brite wheels, and I go ahead and basically, not polish, but basically buff off the black anodizing or black oxide inside the clutch bell. Sometimes there can be a little bit of oil on the bell. You can just spray that off and just run it, but I like to kind of scuff off the black oxide just because it allows the clutch to grab a little bit better, and you don't want to have the clutch slip and wear out the shoes. So you'll just want to kind of work the Scotch-Brite wheel in and out and around, and then occasionally you'll just stop, check, look to see. So the majority of the black oxide has come off, but there's still some. So we're going to go ahead and do this a little bit more. And then once you have a clean surface, just to be safe, I'll go ahead and use a little bit of brake cleaner, spray off. Just, you want to make sure that there's no oil on the bell, because otherwise it can cause the shoes to slip. And if they slip, it's going to cause the shoes to wear a little bit quicker. Next, I'm going to take the clutch nut, and I'm going to go ahead again, spray it off with brake cleaner. Wipe that off with a microfiber towel. Sometimes I'll even take a lighter and just make sure that you kind of burn off any of the oil. Just make sure not to burn your fingertips in the process. But that way it kind of dries the brake cleaner and also gets rid of any of the oil. So we'll go ahead and set that to the side. And then as far as the flywheel and clutch goes, you'll want to wait to install the clutch pins and shoes until after the flywheel's been secured onto the engine. So you'll put the collet onto the engine. Always make sure to pull out the crankshaft, and then make sure that the collet is pushed tight up against the front bearing. I then use a mix of 50-50 mix of blue and red thread lock. Put just a couple drops on the threads of the crankshaft. You don't need too much. Install the flywheel. Again, making sure pulling the crankshaft out. And then I'll just kind of snug up the clutch nut. Then I will use the RM2 flywheel tool from J Concepts. And I'll go ahead and tighten the clutch nut down the rest of the way. Now the clutch nut needs to be super tight. This isn't something that you take off often, so I like to make sure that it's cranked down super tight. With the engines, if you receive the engine from us after EBIS, we always install a zip tie to help seal the carb boot. You can use like a high temp RTV or a type of carb sealant on the pinch bolt if you want. One thing I do recommend for sure is to always take out this pinch bolt screw and put just a drop of thread lock to make sure that that stays in. But if you want an extra or added kind of precaution, you can also use a little bit of RTV sealant on the carburetor. So we're going to let that sit just for a minute, and then we'll move on to the air filter. So this is the low-C air filter boot. This is just something that I've used for a long, long time. It works good. It gives a little bit more room when it comes to the linkage. Just less chance of the filter hitting the brake linkage. You can use the stock MBX8R or whatever comes in the car that you're running, but I would still use these tips that I'm about to show with any filter that you choose to use. So I'm going to take just a little bit of glue and just run a really thin bead of glue. Our glue's clogged up, so gotta open that up. So we'll put just a thin bead of glue all the way around. And this is just to make sure if the zip tie fails, you want to make sure that this housing can't come off the rubber boot. So I'm going to also let this sit just for a minute. We'll use my cleaning putty so that that glue can start to cure. And then once it cures, I'll go ahead and put the zip ties on. So now we're going to move on to, we're kind of jumping all around, but it's mainly because I want to let the thread lock set up a little bit, let the glue on the filter housing. But so now we're going to go ahead and install the clutch shoes. Now you don't need any thread lock for the clutch pins, and the clutch pins also don't need to be super tight. They just kind of need to be snug. So we're going to use 1.0 springs on the 2 aluminum shoes. And then you're going to put the aluminum shoes 180 degrees apart from one another. And then I'm also going to use 2 carbon clutch shoes. So with the carbon shoes, you can use 0.9 springs. I like my clutch a little bit more aggressive, so I'm going to use 0.95 springs, which at the moment Protek doesn't make, but you can use the 0.95 springs from Associated. It's their green spring. So I'm going to get 2 of those out. Two carbon shoes. Again, when you tighten down these clutch pins, they need to be snug, but they don't really need to be cranked down too tight. Then from there, we're going to go ahead and do the clutch shimming. And normally, I like to always start with at least 1 0.2 millimeter shim on the inside. It will vary depending on the clutch, but you always want to try to make sure that you use at least one shim on the inside. That way it keeps the bearing off of the actual clutch nut. So as far as clutch bearings go, I use either the Mugen NMB clutch bearings or the Avid clutch bearings. So we'll install both bearings. And then it's really important. You want to make sure that you push in on the bell and make sure that there's no binding. Sometimes you need to add an extra shim on the inside because you want to make sure that the head of the clutch screw doesn't rub the bell and the bell doesn't rub the flywheel. Then you'll also need to add, in most cases, at least one 0.2 millimeter shim on the outside. Sometimes you'll need to add a couple. So I'm going to put 2 on the outside. And then I have the OS clutch nut retaining screws. These are pretty nice. They have, it's a cap head, and then it has like a built-in washer. I don't like to use thread lock for the clutch screw because if that head ever breaks or if it gets stripped out, it can be nearly impossible to get out unless you take it to a machine shop. So thread lock on the clutch nut, but not thread lock on the clutch screw that holds the clutch in. And then with the clutch, you'll want to just make sure you have about the same gap of one of those clutch shims. So about 0.2 of a millimeter of end play. Again, check the clutch, make sure everything spins free. If you push it in, if you hold it down, it should always spin free. And then from there, we're going to move back over to the air filter now that that glue has kind of set up. We'll go ahead and put a zip tie just for the added safety and security. Again, even though this is glued, it's so important that your engine stays clean inside. You just want to make sure you take any of the steps possible to keep dust and dirt out of the engine. So we'll go ahead and crank that zip tie down. It's also not a bad idea if you want to go back and just run another thin bead of glue all the way around just as a safety. I was pretty careful making sure when I put the glue that I had a constant bead all the way around, so I'm not gonna do that for now. Just I always like to blow the filter just to make sure if there's any debris or anything, just you never know in packaging. Then I'll go ahead, make sure that boot is pushed all the way down. Make sure that the filter is aligned. And then I'll go ahead and secure the zip tie at the base of the carburetor. Again, pulling it tight with a pair of needle nose pliers. Cut off the excess zip tie. And then we'll move on to the pre-oiled filter. I normally use the Flashpoint pre-oiled filters. Protek also makes really good pre-oiled filters. It's super important. Again, your engine, you want to keep all the dust out, so you want to make sure you use a good filter. A lot of the filters though come with too much oil, so you'll just want to take a blue shop towel, make sure it's brand new and clean, and you'll just kind of squeeze and wring out any of the excess oil. From there, go ahead and install the filter. You can grease both ends of the filter. with the low C filter housing and then the pre-oiled foams from Flashpoint, they actually fit really nice and the foam is compressed. So I don't always use additional grease, but it's never going to hurt if you wanna add a little bit of grease to the end. So from there, you just want to make sure with this cap that it kind of locks in. So you want to kind of rock it or twist it back and forth a little bit to make sure that it locks itself into place. Then you'll go ahead and secure the screw, and you have the engine ready to drop into your buggy or truck for the final break-in.